Hi folks, today we're going to start our series on compensation elements. This is the series where we talk about exactly how you reward your people for the work that they do. Now before we get started, I'd like to just remind you to bang that bell, get notifications, like us, subscribe to us, and of course please comment like crazy. We do look at our comments and we certainly will respond to them. Now, to get started, before we get started, what I'd like to do is talk about the product pricing in a traditional retail space. So we're going to go through the traditional retail space and we're going to talk about exactly how product pricing works in traditional space, because what happens is a lot of companies come to me, and when we talk about pricing their products, there's an enormous amount of guilt attached to it, because they look at the retail space and they look at how pricing is done in retail, and then they want to fix their product pricing to reflect what happens in retail. So I'd like to start off by going through retail, and then you can see exactly how retail works and then show you how we price for multi-level marketing. So to start with, in the retail space, everybody is trying to make a 50% margin. So when you're running a business, you've got to make a profit, because you've got to pay overheads, you've got to pay for stock, you've got to pay to finance the growth of your business, you've got staff, etc. So you need to make some margin, and traditionally everybody's trying to target a 50% margin. So if a product were to cost, for example, $10, that would be the manufactured cost, then the wholesaler would pay $20 for the product, giving the manufacturer a 50% margin. Then, if the wholesaler sells it to the retailer, normally the retailer would pay, in this case, $40, which would give the wholesaler a 50% margin, and then the retailer would sell it onto the consumer at $80, giving the retailer a 50% margin. So in this scenario, each person is getting a 50% margin, meaning that a product that has a $10 cost generally would sell for around $80. Now, this happens a lot, depending on the products. Now, in some food stuff, it's not as prevalent, but in things like clothing, musical equipment, all of those kind of products, that is traditionally how it works. Now, the pricing, in reality, if you're in the retail space, the pricing is squeezed. Because remember that the end retailer, the person who runs the big retail outlet, they own the customer. And that is the piper that calls the tune. So if you want to get your product in, you've got to go through them, and the buyers are going to obviously try and screw every single cent they can. So what normally happens is that the prices, though the margins, are pushed down to as low as 30%, sometimes even lower, but traditionally about 30% is as low as it can go if they want the people to survive. So here you have a situation where $10 manufacturing cost, the wholesaler pays $14.25, which means that the manufacturer is making a 30% margin. The retailer purchases the product for $20.36, meaning that the wholesaler only makes a 30% margin, and then the consumer would pay around about $29 for that product, meaning that there's a 30% margin for the retailer. So in this case, in this scenario, 29 divided by 10 means that there's a 2.9 markup factor. So you can see in the first scenario, it's an 8 times markup factor. In the second scenario, it's a 2.5 times markup, 2.9 times markup factor. Now, how do these people cope with these incredibly low prices? How do the manufacturers and the wholesalers cope with having their margins squeezed so hard? Well, it's real simple. The first thing is they will reduce their labor cost. If you pay your people less, then you obviously make more money. Now, they reduce their labor costs in one of two ways. The first thing is that they automate wherever possible. So they reduce the number of people that are needed to produce whatever product they're doing. And if you go into big factories, you'll see that the automation is huge. The second thing is they will make sure that they get their people to work as efficiently and hard as possible. And the third thing is they'll pay as little as possible to keep that person from leaving. Now, it's not that they're spiteful, mean people. It's the only way that they can stay afloat. Next, they reduce their expense in terms of the expensive ingredients. So the next thing, they look at the ingredients and they say to themselves, well, look, these ingredients are expensive and we can reduce the amount of expensive ingredients. So the percentage of expensive ingredient goes down, obviously reducing the efficacy of the product. Next, the less expensive ingredients go up. So I'll give you an example. In the case of, let's say, dishwashing liquid, there's two ways of creating a highly viscous or a high viscosity dishwashing liquid. You know, when you squeeze it out, you want it to be nice and thick. Well, the one way is to use chemicals, expensive chemicals that make it, thicker. And the second way is to put a lot of salt into the product. So when the product margins are squeezed, what the companies do is they remove the chemicals that make the product thick, and they then load the product with salt. Now, salt is nice and cheap, so they can make the product nice and thick just simply by pumping salt into the product. So you can see there's an example of them trying to get margin by reducing the efficacy of the product. And then, of course, they'll go for the least expensive packaging. And let me just put my glasses on here. The economies of scale are the next thing that are taken into account. In other words, you have to be moving a lot of product in order to make this kind of thin margin work. Now, for the most part, the small operators can't move a lot of product. It's very, very difficult for them to get into the space and grow into the space and move a lot of product. So two things happen often to manufacturers. Number one, they don't have the cash flow to maintain or sustain a retail outlet. Number two, the product isn't as compelling as it should be, and therefore the retailers just drop it. And number three, the product is awesome, and some big corporation swoops in and picks the product up from the manufacturer for next to nothing, because they've got nowhere to go. So the big producers will come in and say, hey, listen, this is a great product. They make them an offer. The guy's under stress because he can't keep up with the demands of the retail industry, and he sells to the big manufacturers who've then got the capital and the clout to be able to scale the business, scale up the volumes, and get the economies of scale working for them and generate income. Now, the wholesalers, they also got to try and reduce their income as much as possible. So the way they do it is they reduce their labor costs. So the first thing is they automate wherever possible, and they reduce their labor cost as much as possible. The second thing is they obviously need the economies of scale. So they try and get products that will move big volumes, because if they're moving big volumes, they can actually have thinner margins because the volumes make up for it. And lastly, they put their warehousing in the cheapest possible place. So they find extremely inexpensive, out-of-the-way places, and they put their warehousing there. And that's how they try and control the costs on their side. Of course, then there's the retailer. Now, the retailers, they're wonderful. The first thing, they're squeezing the manufacturer and the wholesaler to get the best possible price out. Now, remember, they own the client. They own the customer. So you've got no way of getting to the customer except through the retail outlets. So they've basically got you by the court and the Shirleys. You've got no option. You have to go through them, and they can dictate the prices, and they will squeeze as much as they can out of you, to the point of you either take it or you leave. The next thing is they list your product, and then they'll charge you a listing fee. Now, in this case, we've seen products that have been listed from anything from $35,000 up to $100,000 just to get the product on their list. They haven't sold a single item yet, just to list your product. And I've got one particular example where a friend of mine paid $35,000 to have one bottle of wine listed with a major retailer. So that just gives you some idea of where they are making their money. Next, they'll charge you for shelf space. So you'll have a situation where you'll be able to use their shelf space. If you want eye-level shelf space, it costs you X. If you take a top shelf space, it costs you Y. And if you down in the ground, it costs you another price. If you want a gondola end, that's extra cost. If you want to have it at the till point, that's again extra cost. So no matter where you put it in their store, they just ping you. Then you've got a marketing contribution. So they don't actually market the product themselves. What they do is they get you to give them money, and then based on the money you give them, they do the marketing. So it costs them nothing to market the product because you're paying for the marketing. Then they keep the money that you give them, well, that they get from the customer purchasing it, for anything up to 120 days. So the money that you should be getting to pay your product, for absolutely up to 120 days, they can hang on to it. So you'll end up with a situation where you're funding their business. You're funding it through marketing, you're buying the shelf space, you're paying for the real estate. Then you're giving them the money that should be coming to you is sitting in their bank account for up to 120 days, and they're earning interest on it. They're leveraging that cash. They can roll that cash over, a number of times before having to pay you. Then, if they do happen to pay you on time, if they pay you the one-time payment, the on-time payment, if they pay you on time, they want you to pay them a commission. So they take an extra 2.5% if they pay you on the time that they promised to pay you in the first place. Then they get the lowest possible rentals because they become anchor tenants for these big shopping centers. So as an anchor tenant, they can negotiate incredibly low rental, and that, again, spills over because the small companies within that retail space all have to pay maximum dollar to fund the big retailers. And then, of course, they pay minimum wages for whoever works for them. Now, I can assure you that the bosses of these companies don't wake up in the morning and say, listen, let's see how we can help our pickers and packers and shelf stockers and till hands. Let's see how we can help them to retire when they, get to 65. No, they are trying to leverage every ounce out of those people to try and get themselves to retire. So these pickers and packers and till hands come to the shops, they work their guts out every day so that the bosses can retire financially independent and can earn massive incomes and all of the rest of it. And there is no route. If you're a picker and packer, what are your chances of ever becoming the chairman of the company? It's 0 to nothing. There's no chance. So you are stuck right down where you are. They keep you down. If you have a look at some of the big companies like Amazon and have a look at the policies they have for the people working in their warehouses, it is shocking how they treat their people. So, who makes the money? Well, of course, you've got the chairman of the board. You're going to have a look at these big retailers and see. They're publicly listed companies, so you can see what the people are earning. They earn massive amounts of money. Then you've got your board of directors. They earn massive amounts of money. You got your shareholders who are making an absolute killing. They are earning massive amounts of money. Now, all of these people are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer, because what happens to the rest of the people working for those organizations? Well, they're earning peanuts and they're stuck where they are. They're getting screwed, basically. And they're getting screwed at the expense of making the rich richer. So this whole concept of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer is very evident within the retail space. It's one of the places that I see the most evidence of it. So if you look at these things, they look remarkably like a pyramid. And they talk about MLM being an illegal or unethical pyramid scheme. Well, I tell you what, in my opinion, these big retail outlets are among the worst pyramid schemes on the planet. They're just horrible. So when you look at your business, you need to realize that the retailers are not being ethical. They're not being honest. They are actually screwing everybody sideways in the process of trying to enrich themselves and trying to feather their own beds. And the wholesalers and manufacturers have got no choice. There is no other way for them to go. So they are basically held captive to these people who monopolize the retail outlets, the retail space. Now, in the multi-level marketing calculation, we take a different stance on this. What we say is that when you are putting a product together, you shouldn't have to compromise on the quality of the product. You shouldn't have to compromise on the margins that people make for doing a day's work. The people who are working hard should earn good money. And you shouldn't have to compromise on the fact that the client at the end of the day is getting a fair deal. So there should be a value chain there that suits everybody down the road. So traditionally what happens is we would look at a 6-time multiple. Now that is less than what the big retail, the wholesale retail value chain aims for, but it's a bit more than they squeeze people to the wall for. So in this case, a manufacturer, if they were manufacturing the product at $10, there would be a 6x multiple for that, and that would make a $60 sales price. So when you look at your product, you should be targeting a minimum of a 6x from landed cost. So if it lands up on your shelf for $10, you should be selling it for $60. That's just a fact of life. Next, the manufacturer should be doing a 40%, and if you've got a 6 times margin, the manufacturer gets a 40%. The network, who's doing the selling and setting up the structures and actually creating the movement of the product, would make 40%. So you normally target network commissions of 40%. And then the person who's on the field physically selling the product to an end user should be getting around 40%. So right the way through that value chain, everybody should be getting their due income from the efforts they're making. So everybody here makes money. And you don't need to feel guilty about that. There's no reason to feel guilty. So your main thing is that, first of all, you should be saying that we have an excellent product and we're not compromising at all on the quality. So there should be no quality compromise. You should have an incredible product, and that product should be of a high quality, and you should be able to justify your price based on the fact that you're not having to compromise in that department. The next thing, you need to have a compelling story. Why is this product so epic? What makes this product such an amazing product? What ingredients are in it? How did you not compromise? What are you doing to make sure that this product is absolutely epic? And this is the story that you tell. And I think I've told a number of these stories in previous videos that I've done. So it would be a good idea to go and have a look at how that compelling story works. But it needs to be compelling. And remember, your agent is sitting in front of somebody, talking to them about the product, telling them why that product is amazing. And there's a value add intrinsically in that. So there's 2 value adds here. Product is awesome. You didn't have to compromise on quality. Number 2, you've got a person who's sitting in front of the person, the potential customer, and telling them why the product is awesome and educating them. So that's the second value add. And then the third thing is that in this case, everybody gets their due. So when you're working with these people, you know that when you purchase the product as a customer, everybody's making a fair income from the deal. Now, we can take this to just take, for example, clothing. There's no excuse for buying cheap clothing from a country where they're using child labor, for example. You know, how do you justify that? So you justify it by saying, well, I want the product cheap and I don't care about the children. Well, no, that's not how people work generally. And if they find out that there's child labor involved, they don't go and buy the product there. Now, if you look at the retail environment, I'm sorry, but these people are taking advantage of vulnerable people and forcing them to work at incredibly low prices so that they can get the product into your hands cheap. So if you're a retail purchaser, it's not 100% ethical there. That's a pyramid scheme in my book. If you're in the MLM space, everybody's making a fair shake. The product is high quality. The network is making decent money, and the customer at the end of the day is getting a value offering. So there is no need for you to feel guilty that you're doing a 6x markup. There's no need to mark your price at the kind of prices that the retailers are doing, because again, there's an ethics issue there as far as I'm concerned. And it gives you the ability to run a professional business in the space without having to worry about the fact that you're doing somebody in terms of their income stream. So I know that there was a bit of a rant there, and I'm sorry for the rant, but it is honestly, I'm tired of hearing people tell me that MLM is an illegal pyramid scam when the people who are out there in the retail space are doing things far more unethically and far more, there's far more punitive action being taken against the innocent manufacturers and wholesalers who are just trying to make a living here. So guys, in terms of pricing, which is what this was all about, you have to price your product right. You shouldn't be below 6x in terms of that. If you can get to 8x, everybody's doing 50%. That is the ideal place to be. But definitely below 6 times, you really are squeezing your network, and you're obviously squeezing your own margins. And if your business fails, it doesn't help anybody. You've got to be making money in order for the business to succeed, and in order for you to keep your products at the kind of quality and standard you have. I hope this has been helpful. Again, just remember to, if you like this, please bash that bell, like us, comment, whatever. I'm sure that I've got a whole pile of people who think I'm being unreasonable about the retail space, and I'm welcome to, you're welcome to comment, and I'm definitely welcome to, I'll engage with you on that. But in the meantime, for those of you who are looking to price your product properly, please go out, do a 6 times markup, and in our next following series, I'll show you how we give that money to the people doing the work, and how we structure our compensation plan so that everybody is making money for the effort they put in. Thanks very much for your time. Cheers.
You're welcome.